The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, the 5th chapter. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him, and he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
I'm so grateful today for the richness of the lectionary, and it's amazing and comforting to me that we have these two gems today. I feel like God is actually caring for us through the lectionary by reminding us of who God is and how we can live in this time. Over the past 10 days or so, it seems like everywhere I turn, I see or hear Micah 6:8. A couple of days ago, several of the religious leaders in the Praying with Our Feet action lifted up these powerful words. "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God?" A Catholic sister pointed out to us, this is a commandment, not a suggestion. In Minneapolis, I carried this sign. I don't know if the people in the back can see it, but it says, "Do justice, love kindness, abolish ICE." And one veteran came up to me and said, "I think Micah would agree." And maybe after this last week of weather in DC, I think we can all get behind abolishing ICE in whatever form, whether it be frozen water or an immigration enforcement force. So I want to start with giving a brief overview of the Beatitudes and then focus on the first one, which connects so beautifully with walking humbly with our God, which is what I believe we are called to do in this time. It might help to take a look at these verses, which are on page 6 of your bulletin. We all know the Beatitudes, and there are many different ways of understanding them. One of the ways that I've found meaningful is from a scholar named Mark Allen Powell. He says that the first four are a description of what will happen when God's rule is established. These are all the people whose circumstances will be reversed. The poor in spirit are people whose spirits have been crushed by all they've been through. Those who mourn are people who have lives that are so far from what they hoped. The meek are the oppressed, and those who hunger for righteousness are longing to be treated fairly. When God's kingdom comes in its fullness, when God's will is done on earth as in heaven, things will be made right and whole for all of these people. The next four Beatitudes, verses 7 through 10, are about people who join God in alleviating all the suffering and righting the world. The merciful are the healers. The pure in heart are those who are authentic, who bring who they are into this healing work. The peacemakers work to end the iniquities that make for conflict. The persecuted are blessed not because of the persecution itself, but because they are so committed to God's cause. The final two verses are for the disciples and for readers of the gospel, they're for us. The message is that anyone who joins God in this holy work will become oppressed and persecuted. The Beatitudes are beautiful and terrifying all at the same time. And they leave me both inspired and perplexed. How is it possible to live this way? Which brings us back to the first beatitude. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Now, I said there are many different ways to understand these beautiful and terrifying verses. There is not just one correct interpretation. And that, for me, is the power of the Word of God. There is so much meaning in it. Last fall, I was on a day retreat with Brother Emil from the Thésée community in France, and he spoke about the first beatitude being the primary one and that the others were commentary on it. Blessed are the poor in spirit. And the way that he understands this beatitude is so different, I am still thinking about it. Brother Emil describes being poor in spirit as a deep acceptance of how things are. It's the complete opposite of putting your head in the sand or being a Pollyanna. And it is also different from despair about how terrible things are. Brother Emil says that with this deep acceptance, within the truth of how things really are, you can be creative. There's something about seeing the constraints, seeing the limits of what you can and can't do that frees you to act. It seems counterintuitive. You would think that seeing the limits, accepting the truth of them, would lead to hopelessness, to throwing up your hands and giving up, but it's actually the opposite. Being poor in spirit, living in the truth of how things are, is intimately tied to walking humbly with our God. It is not a stuck place. It is not a place of despair or escape. It is a place of movement, moving forward with God. And I honestly can't see any other way to live in this time. Over the last couple of weeks, I have been transformed. And I believe when you have been transformed, when you experience the power of God to bring you to a new place that is filled with life, you need to testify to that. For the past year, I have been involved with the Congregational Action Network, and it's the main group that's doing faith-based work supporting and advocating for immigrants who are under attack in our area. In the middle of January, we hosted here at CLC a mini retreat for faith leaders who were weary from all this work. And that was a moment of restoration for me. And a few days later, I went to a vigil and a prayer service following the killing of Renee Good. It was organized by Faith in Action, which is the national group that Congregational Action Network is a part of. I wound up holding one end of a large banner in front of the media who were there. And Paul went with me, and we both agreed that every single speaker shared an inspiring message. It was something that energized us and helped me to see more clearly the unique power that can be unleashed in people of faith. And about a week after that, the invitation to go to Minneapolis came. I was working on my MLK sermon and immersing myself in his sermons and writings. And all of that was part of the way that God was working on me. It was impossible not to see the parallels between that time and ours. But I was struggling because I knew it would be hard on my family, and we are all in a fragile place these days. And I also had my own fears. I do not feel called to be a martyr, and I would like to live as long as I can. I really want to see my grandson grow up. I talked to Paul about it, and he was strong in his support. If you are called, you should go. Of course, I found out when I got back that he'd never been so terrified in his life. 2 weeks ago, early on Sunday morning, I was finishing up my sermon and still trying to get clarity about whether I should go to Minneapolis. And I do not usually do this, but I asked God to give me a clear sign. And a few seconds later, I got a text from my dear friend Jean. "I'm going to Minneapolis. Are you?" I immediately texted back, "Yes." Jean is a United Church of Christ minister and a palliative care chaplain in New York City, and we've been friends since college. We lived and worked together here in D.C. and in Guatemala. We are godparents to each other's children. And in Minneapolis, we stuck to each other like glue. In Guatemala, part of our work was organizing delegations of people of faith who would come to learn about the situation there and who, by their presence, would help lower the level of violence. Being in Minneapolis was a lot like being on a delegation. But instead of a group of 20, there were 1,000 of us. March, which stands for Multi-Faith, Anti-Racist, Change and Healing, called for 500 leaders to come. And 6 days later, over 1,000 filled the sanctuary of Westminster Presbyterian Church. We sang and we prayed and we heard from an array of local leaders about what was going on. They described the presence of over 3,000 ICE and Border Patrol agents in their city as occupation. They called it an experiment in community destruction. But this was not the whole story. We also learned about and witnessed how a whole new civil society is being built underneath the repression. We saw what one leader called the fierce, tender, transformative power of love. One particularly moving moment for me was when the associate pastor of Westminster Presbyterian welcomed us, saying what a beautiful sight we were. She said, "I don't know how to quantify the repair that was happening in me when I saw all of you." I said to myself, if I don't do anything else, this was the reason I was here. Shortly after that, we were given the opportunity to walk around the streets in an area that has had a lot of ICE activity. We had whistles, and if we saw ICE abducting someone, we were told to blow the whistles to alert people so that they could avoid the area and to document what was happening with our phones. We were also told to ask the person who was being abducted for a phone number and a person to call to let them know what had happened. They used the words abducted and kidnapped because there is no arrest warrant. There is no process of being able to make a phone call to a lawyer. And often people are held less than 3 hours before they are put on a flight to a detention center in Texas or Louisiana. It is like they disappear. But instead of death squads in Central America, these are law enforcement agents whose salaries we all pay through our taxes. On our walk, we stopped in a store owned by a Mexican immigrant, and he shared that he had personally helped 3,000 people fill out DOPA forms. DOPA stands for Delegation of Parental Authority. It's a document that allows someone to care for your children if you are deported. On the one hand, I can hardly imagine anything harder. But on the other hand, what an amazing and important ministry this man has carried out. It's an example of the creativity that comes from the poor in spirit. Seeing clearly how things are and walking humbly with God in that place, doing something that makes a difference. I saw this over and over again, and it's not possible for me to share everything today, and I expect that more stories will find their way into other sermons. But one I would like to share is about St. Paul, San Pablo Lutheran Church. As the pastor shared when we visited them, they have always been a bilingual church. First, Swedish English, and now Spanish English. They have a beautiful welcoming space, and they offer an array of healing ministries, including Reiki and acupuncture, and a clinic staffed by University of Minnesota medical students. The people of San Pablo are on the edge, and they embody the poor in spirit and walking humbly with God. They have found that space in which to live creatively, to live in a way that is bringing life. They have dance parties in the sanctuary, even when ICE vehicles are patrolling outside. They walk around the neighborhood singing to be a different kind of presence among the people who are so afraid that they stay in their houses with their curtains drawn. About 100 of us accompanied them on one of these walks, singing, watching people peer out from behind the curtains. And a little while later, back in the church, we were getting ready to head out to the big march in downtown Minneapolis. But then we were told to sit back down because we were in lockdown. ICE had grabbed a person a block away, and 2 people had gotten injured in their efforts to escape. They came to the church and were being treated in the clinic. The church leaders didn't want to open the doors and risk ICE coming in. So we waited until after ICE had left the area and the people in the church had returned safely home. What a picture of the church being a sanctuary and a place of healing. I have not even gotten to share about the moving actions that several of us participated in on Thursday, and I look forward to doing that at some point. They were part of the fruit that came from what we lived in Minneapolis. And they're further evidence to me of how God is working in this time and what it looks like to walk humbly with God instead of being stuck in despair. It was so good to be with so many people of faith here in D.C., and we had a good contingent of CLC and other Lutherans. And I was so grateful to be with our bishop, Phil Persh. He shared this prayer of protection, which I would like to pray as I close. Holy One, holy and mighty, holy and immortal, we give you thanks this morning for the gift of one another, for the courage that has drawn us together, and for the shared conviction that love of neighbor demands more than words, but calls us to action. As we prepare to step into public witness, we ask now for your protection to be in everyone assembled here. Protect our bodies from harm, our minds from confusion, and our hearts from fear, and our spirits from despair. Surround us with your peace. Strengthen us by your presence. Guard our movements, guide our conversations and our intentions. Let those in authority today act with restraint and wisdom. Let every encounter be guided by dignity and respect, especially in moments of tension or uncertainty. Grant us clarity of purpose. When our voices are raised, let them speak truth without cruelty. When we are challenged, grant us patience without being passive. When we are afraid, remind us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act in love anyway. Strengthen our commitment to the common good. Help us remember why we are here, not to humiliate or condemn, but to seek justice, accountability, and peace for the sake of our neighbors, our communities, and our country. May our actions today reflect the best of our faith and traditions. the care for the vulnerable, and the unshakable belief that every human life holds sacred worth. Go before us, walk beside us. Let your love live within each of us and bring us home safely, having acted with integrity, compassion, and hope. Amen.